All right, so I'm going to break up the next um, three tutorials into three different videos. Today I will post the John Milton one. I was looking at the just how much is in the neoclassicism 1 and 2 and just what it asks you about. So I just want to do them in separate videos. So today, this video is going to cover John Milton. So again, as always, it's really important that you go through the tutorial yourself and like read through all the information. A lot of that information is useful for the test, whereas I'm just going to go over what is in the lesson activities. So after reading all about John Milton, you should know quite a few things. Some of the stuff that's interesting, like he went blind, um, and so his most famous work, Paradise Lost, was actually transcribed for him. So there's little, bits of really interesting stuff in there, especially the history um, of what was going on in England at the time. So, part A. So, what words and sounds does Milton use in the poem Il Penseroso to create a quiet and somber tone? There's the two poems, Allegro and Il Penseroso, and they're supposed to be read together for the best understanding. So let me move this thing. Okay. And so we're just looking for what he uses to create like this quiet, somber tone. And then really the main focus is about Paradise Lost for the rest of the lesson activity. So I'm not going to read through the whole poem. Please read through it, but think about what words and how words and diction really play into tone. So again, you're looking for a quiet and somber tone. Let's see. So, I'm just looking to see where I can find some of the examples that I have. Okay, so pensive is one, sober. We even have things like sad, leaden, downward cast. Like these are all words that sort of attribute to that tone. So you're trying to find just a couple of words. It just asks, what are some of them? So you can just say some of the words and sounds that Milton uses in the poem, blah, 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 blah. Okay, so Paradise Lost is just overall a really interesting work. It's based off of the biblical creation story of Adam and Eve and how Satan tricked Eve and all of that. And so a lot of, I think, what we know in popular culture in regards to the creation story of Adam and Eve is actually probably more based in elements of Paradise Lost. And so the major theme really of the poem is the idea of disobedience. It really starts out with the disobedience of Satan and his followers, and that's why they're cast out from heaven, because they were jealous of God's creation of man, and so they're cast out, and then they want to disobey God's orders and continue to rebel against God. Then you also have the fact that Eve is sort of a defiant woman. And Adam loves Eve really purely, and he chooses her and like being with her and stuff over obeying God. And then really comes to a fold in the final real betrayal, which is when Eve eats the fruit of knowledge, Adam eats the fruit of knowledge, and then because Satan disguised tricks them. So it's sort of like everybody is being disobedient to God in the end. And then ultimately, the consequences, at first, we start out with the idea that Satan and his followers, as a consequence of their disobedience, are banished down to earth. And then, as a consequence of Adam and Eve's disobedience, humans are banished from Eden, and women must bear incredible pain in childbirth, and men must work and toil the fields. And so I'll show some videos that kind of like explain this too, but that's just sort of like the main ideas of where the theme of disobedience comes up. And then I have some information for you too that covers how Satan justifies the decision to entice Adam and Eve. I have some textual evidence for you. And then for part D, you're just supposed to choose 2 words from the poems, look them up in a dictionary, and write a new sentence for each word. Some of what I'm seeing is not for each word when I'm looking through lesson activities. So that's really important. Just make sure you're following the directions. And then so after you go through the lesson, every time it gives you information, you have some bits that go and like explain it throughout the tutorial. And so go ahead and do that. Part E, you're going to look for a few lines from Paradise Lost that weren't covered in the lesson and try and do a translation like we've done with some other activities in the past. And then finally in part F, and again, this is something that you need to do on your own. You need to form your own opinion. But the English romantic poet Percy Bysshe Shelley once made the following statement about Paradise Lost. Nothing can exceed the energy and magnificence of the character of Satan as expressed in Paradise Lost. It is a mistake to suppose that he could ever have been intended for the popular personification of evil. In light of this statement, examine the claim that Satan in Paradise Lost is not merely evil personified, but rather a misunderstood character. Develop an argument for or against the claim using evidence from the text. Answer in 5 or 6 paragraphs. You will find the information for this at the beginning of book 4. That is really where you get the idea about like Satan as more than just evil. So with all that said, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a couple of videos. I'm going to play a summary of books 1 and book 4, which are the 2 reading selections. And then I'm going to play, and that'll help with part B. And then I'm going to play like a little clip about theme for part B from a longer video. And then I'm going to play to help with part C. I'm going to play another clip from a longer video, and then I'll also just give you some of that information from book 4 and like look at that. So yeah, let's get that going. Sorry, it's playing in the wrong window.
John Milton prefaces Book 1 of Paradise Lost to explain that he rejects the convention of heroic couplets to liberate his heroic poem from the troublesome bondage of rhyming. But then the opening lines of Book 1 tick off expected elements of epic. Milton states his major theme of man's first disobedience, invokes the muse to aid my adventurous song and justify the ways of God to men. And then Milton throws us into the midst of a tale already underway, the story of Satan's armed rebellion against the monarchy of God. The story begins in the wake of the rebels' defeat. They've been cast out into bottomless darkness and endless torture. The archenemy Satan awakens on a fiery lake next to his first mate Beelzebub. In an exchange of rousing speeches, Satan and Beelzebub determine never to submit or yield. They plan to wage eternal war against the tyranny of heaven. Satan proclaims, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." He calls out to his legions, and Milton offers an epic catalog of fallen gods. Addressing his full army, Satan gives voice to a rumor that God plans to plant a new colony, and Satan calls a council to determine war tactics of fraud and guile. Vulcan builds a great gold capital called Pandemonium, all demons, and the great council begins.
All right. So that's sort of a little summary of the first book. Get that next
Book 4 of Paradise Lost starts with Satan gazing toward Eden, overcome by doubt and despair and bitter memory of what he was. He thinks about his relationship with God and wonders if there's still space for repentance and pardon, but then he realizes that he'll never submit, and he resolves anew to hold with evil. In the guise of a bird, Satan flies into the tree of life to get a better view of the blissful, idyllic Garden of Eden. He sees Adam and Eve hand in hand, noble and godlike, and this mark of God's favor strengthens his resolve to tempt them and deliver them to woe. He leaves the tree and shapeshifts to get closer, overhearing their conversation. Adam reminds Eve that their only rule is not to eat from the tree of knowledge, for God hath pronounced it death to taste that tree. Eve agrees, reliving her first memories, how a voice directed her to Adam, saying, "Of him you are, his flesh, his bone." But first she's transfixed by her own reflection in a pool. Eve then remembers what Adam first told her. "To give you being, I lent my side to you, nearest my heart, to have you by my side as dear solace." At this, their conversation turns to conjugal delight. Envious of their pure love, Satan resolves to seduce them with forbidden fruit. Meanwhile, Archangel Uriel suspects that that was no cherub, and he warns Archangel Gabriel that a fallen angel has entered paradise. He sends 2 strong angels to watch over Adam and Eve, and they find Satan at Eve's ear, tempting her dreams. They bring him unwilling to Gabriel. As Satan prepares to fight, God sends the sign of a pair of golden scales in the sky. Convinced that the scales indicate his pending defeat, Satan flees to hell. Milton again shows Satan as a somewhat sympathetic character, afflicted by envy and doubt. It's no coincidence that this is the first time the reader has access to Satan's internal thoughts, which conflict with his outward displays of confidence. Eve's love lyric to Adam introduces us to the gentle couple's loving and sexually active companionship. And here Milton upends convention by introducing a domestic couple as epic and heroic figures. Eve's initial vanity evokes Narcissus, and her indirect experience of God's love through her own love for her husband shows their marriage to be an unequal partnership. And yet this central relationship is a loving source of mutual solace, and Eve has a well-rounded character and prominent voice that defy many contemporary literary expectations of a wife's role.
right. That's just over here. Okay. And then, okay, this is one that talks a lot about the themes that we're like going over.
Obedience and disobedience. Milton styles Satan's disobedience to God as political rebellion.
Hold on. There.
But not so the fall of Adam and Eve, seen much more as a domestic dispute. With both stories of fallen creatures, Milton suggests that the order of the world depends on obedience to God, sin, and innocence. Innocence for Adam and Eve is closely connected to their ignorance. When they lose their innocence, it's because they disobey God's instructions and bring sin into the world. Once they have sinned, they can never be innocent again. Fate and free will. If God has knowledge of everything that has happened and will ever happen, and also possesses the power to change anything, do his creatures really have free will? Milton tries to make the case that God is careful not to influence his creatures, but to leave their individual choices to them, even when he can see the outcome. He does this because he wants all his creatures to obey him out of love, not because they are forced to. It has been said of John Milton that no other major English poet has been so deeply involved in the great questions and political crises of his time.
All right. So hopefully that, just sort of goes over some of this stuff, like regarding the theme of disobedience. You have a little bit more going on there, like what I was talking about. And then, okay, so with part C, let's actually take a look. So if you scroll down, like really near to the bottom, so just like with book 4, like the video said, like it really opens with Satan looking down across the Garden of Eden, and then we skip like kind of through, and so he's looking and he's just like, it's like a description of God and, or not God, Adam and Eve here, and then we skip a little bit and like yeah, and so it just later continues, and then like after he's reflected for a little bit, right around here, so this is where he is talking about his justification. So this is just one of the examples that I found, and then like I said, I have a little bit of a video going on. So, one fatal tree there stands of knowledge called, forbidden them to taste. Knowledge forbidden, suspicious, reasonless. Why should their Lord envy them that? Can it be sin to know? Can it be death? And do they only stand by ignorance? Is that their happy state, the proof of their obedience and their faith? O fair foundation laid whereon to build their ruin. Hence I will excite their minds with more desire to know, and to reject envious commands, invented with design to keep them low, whom knowledge might exalt, equal with gods, aspiring to be such, they taste and die. What likelier can ensue? So basically what he's saying is that, like, why would God forbid them from knowledge? Well, really the only reason is that he's afraid that all having knowledge would make them equal to gods. And so he uses that as part of his justification for why he wants to trick them.
Fruit from the tree of knowledge. The fruit symbolizes the seductive temptation to gain knowledge that only God should know. God forbids Adam and Eve from eating it, which makes them want it even more. Eating it causes both of them to fall from their innocent and ignorant state. The idyllic Garden of Eden symbolizes God's favor and his direct connection to Adam and Eve. Once Adam and Eve disobey God, they are banished from the garden, making it a symbol of the fall and the material separation between earth and heaven.
So yeah, just a little bit more about like the tree and that, and then yeah, cool. And you should be able to do some of the research for your other ones on your own. But that really covers just the lesson activity stuff for this. But like I said, as far as like what you need to know for the tests and stuff, you really do need to go through this entire tutorial. It's really interesting stuff too. And I know that maybe I'm just saying that, but hopefully you found this useful.